My name is Dorothy Harper, and at 62 years old, I made the most calculated decision of my life while standing in my late husband's study, staring at his empty reading chair that still smelled faintly of his aftershave. The Seattle rain drummed against the windows like an accusation, and I knew exactly what I had to do to find out which of my 3 children actually loved me. 6 months earlier, I had watched my husband, Robert, slowly disappear from lung cancer, and during those final weeks, I discovered something that shattered my faith in my own family. Michael, my eldest at 34, had visited exactly twice during the 4-month battle both times to discuss Dad's insurance policies and the house equity. Jennifer, my 31-year-old middle child, had been too busy with her interior design firm's expansion to help with doctor appointments, though she found plenty of time to catalog Dad's antique furniture collection. Kevin, my 28-year-old youngest, had been the only one to sit by his father's bedside, reading aloud from Dad's favorite mystery novels, even when the morphine made him incoherent. The contrast had been stark and devastating. I realized I had raised 2 children who saw their parents as assets to be managed rather than people to be cherished, but I needed to be certain before I made any decisions about my future, about my will, about who deserved my trust in the years I had left. That Thursday morning in October, I called my longtime friend Eleanor Martinez, my fellow retired teacher, who lived 3 blocks away in our Queen Anne neighborhood. Eleanor had been my confidant through 37 years of marriage, and she was the only person who would understand what I was planning. "Dorothy, you want to do it exactly?" Eleanor asked, nearly spilling her coffee as we sat in her kitchen overlooking Elliott Bay. "I want to pretend I'm developing early-stage dementia," I said, calmly surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Just minor memory issues at first. I need to see how each of them reacts when they think I'm becoming vulnerable." Eleanor set down her mug and studied my face with those sharp, brown eyes that had terrified generations of 7th graders. "And you're sure about this, because once you start this particular performance, there's no taking it back without devastating consequences." I thought about Michael's irritated sighs whenever I'd called to update him on his father's condition. I remembered Jennifer's exasperated tone when I'd asked for help rearranging the living room furniture to accommodate Robert's wheelchair. And I recalled Kevin's gentle patience when he'd helped me learn to operate Robert's oxygen machine at 2 a.m. "I'm sure," I told Eleanor, "but I'll need your help to make it convincing." The plan was simple in its deception. I would begin with small, believable lapses, forgetting appointments I'd made, repeating stories during conversations, misplacing important items like my car keys or reading glasses. Eleanor would serve as my witness and concerned friend, someone who could corroborate my apparent decline to my children when they inevitably started asking questions. We spent that afternoon researching early dementia symptoms online, printing out articles from medical websites, learning the vocabulary of cognitive decline. Eleanor, who had cared for her own mother through Alzheimer's 15 years earlier, coached me on the subtle signs that would seem authentic without being overly dramatic. "Start with short-term memory," she advised. "Forget conversations from yesterday, but remember everything from decades ago perfectly. Mix up names occasionally, but not consistently. And whatever you do, don't overact it. The most convincing performance is the understated one." That evening, I made my first test call to Michael. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Hi, sweetheart," I began. "I was just calling to confirm what time you're picking me up for Dad's doctor appointment tomorrow. Dad passed away 6 months ago. Michael said, his voice sharp, with what I initially mistook for concern, but quickly recognized as annoyance. We've talked about this. Are you feeling okay? I paused, letting confusion color my voice. Of course, I meant my appointment, my checkup with Dr. Peterson. Weren't you driving me? I never said I'd drive you anywhere. You've been driving yourself to appointments for years. Mom, are you sure you're feeling all right? You sound confused. I'm fine, I said, injecting a note of defensiveness that I'd heard from Robert during his own brief period of denial. Just tired. These days all blend together sometimes. After hanging up, I sat in Robert's chair and wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. But then, I remembered how Michael had spent Robert's funeral reception discussing real estate market trends with his cousin, while I sat alone at a table, still wearing the black dress I'd bought specifically to bury my husband. The test had begun. Within a week, I would know exactly who my children really were. Should I continue with ACT2, or would you like me to revise anything in ACTI first? Within 2 weeks, my performance had evolved into something more elaborate than I'd initially planned. Eleanor and I met every Tuesday at Pike Place Market, ostensibly for our weekly grocery shopping, but actually to coordinate the next phase of my deception. The autumn crowds provided perfect cover for our conspiratorial conversations as we moved between the fish vendors and flower stalls. Michael called me yesterday. Eleanor reported selecting apples with theatrical care. He wanted to know if I'd noticed any concerning changes in your behavior recently. I felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. Perhaps my eldest son was genuinely worried about my well-being rather than simply annoyed by my apparent confusion. What did you tell him? Exactly what we rehearsed. That you've seemed a little forgetful lately, maybe repeating yourself more than usual, but nothing too alarming yet. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper as a couple passed our position near the honey vendor. But Dorothy, he didn't sound concerned for your sake. He sounded concerned about what this might mean for your ability to manage your finances. The flutter of hope died instantly. I thought about the questions Michael had been asking during his increasingly frequent phone calls. Not, how are you sleeping? Or, are you eating enough? But, have you been paying your bills on time? And, maybe I should help you organize your banking paperwork. Meanwhile, Jennifer's response had been to suggest I hire a cleaning service, as if my supposed memory issues were primarily a housekeeping inconvenience. She'd visited once since I'd begun the charade, spending exactly 43 minutes in my home, before declaring that I clearly needed professional help managing daily tasks. But Kevin's reaction had been entirely different. My youngest son had started calling every other day, not to interrogate me about my mental state, but to share stories about his work at the community college where he taught history. He'd taken to stopping by on Sunday afternoons, ostensibly to help with yard work, but mostly just to sit on the back porch and talk about everything, except my apparent decline. 3 days earlier, something had happened that complicated my experiment in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was at Safeway, genuinely shopping for groceries, when I encountered Mrs. Chen Roberts' former physical therapist. She approached me with the kind of careful, sympathetic expression people reserve for the recently bereaved. "Dorothy, how are you managing?" she asked, touching my arm gently. "I heard from Eleanor that you've been having some memory concerns." I realized that Eleanor, in her enthusiasm to make our deception convincing, had begun spreading word of my condition beyond just my children. Now, other people in our community were looking at me with pity and careful attention, monitoring my behavior for signs of decline. Standing in the cereal aisle, surrounded by the familiar comfort of Cheerios and cornflakes, I experienced my first real doubt about the wisdom of this entire plan. But then, Mrs. Chen continued speaking, and her next words reminded me why I'd started this test in the first place. You know, when Eleanor mentioned your situation, I immediately thought about what happened with my aunt in Vancouver. Her children were wonderful at first, so attentive and caring. But as her condition progressed, well, she shook her head sadly. It's amazing how quickly people can change when they see opportunity rather than obligation. That evening, Kevin arrived unannounced with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. As we sat at my kitchen table, sharing pad see ew and tom kha soup, he mentioned casually that he'd been researching early memory loss. I found this great support group that meets at the senior center. He said, not looking at me directly, his eyes focused on carefully separating the rice noodles with his fork. It's for people in the early stages and their families. Might be worth checking out just for the information. I studied my youngest son's face, noting the genuine concern in his expression, the way he was trying to be helpful without making me feel diminished or incapable. The contrast with his siblings' reactions was becoming more pronounced with each passing day. That's very thoughtful of you, I said carefully, but I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that yet. Kevin nodded, still not meeting my eyes. Of course, just if you ever want to talk about anything, or if you need help with appointments or paperwork, or hell, if you just want someone to come over and watch terrible movies with you, I'm available. Always. After he left, I called Eleanor to report this latest development. She listened in thoughtful silence before offering her own observation. Dorothy, I think you're discovering exactly what you suspected you'd discover. But I'm worried about Kevin. He's the only one responding with genuine love, and when he finds out about this deception, he's going to be devastated. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for any of this to feel so complicated and painful. What had seemed like a straightforward test was revealing layers of family dysfunction I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Meanwhile, a subplot had emerged that I hadn't anticipated. My neighbor across the street, Harold Brennan, had begun paying increased attention to my daily routines. Harold was a 70-year-old widower who had always been friendly but distant. Now, he seemed to materialize whenever I was getting my mail or taking out the garbage offering assistance and making casual conversation about my well-being. Dorothy, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, Harold said one afternoon, as I was watering the marigolds Robert had planted in our front garden the spring before he died. But Eleanor mentioned you've been having some memory concerns. I just want you to know that if you ever need anything, help with groceries or rides to appointments, I'm right across the street. I realized that my fake condition was creating a ripple effect through my entire community. People who had barely acknowledged me during Robert's illness were now positioning themselves as potential helpers and advocates. It was both touching and deeply cynical, depending on how I chose to interpret their motivations. That night, as I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by his books and the faint scent of his presence, I made a decision. The test would continue, but I would escalate it. I needed definitive proof of where each of my children stood before I could move forward with the difficult choices that lay ahead. Tomorrow, I would take my performance to the next level. The incident at the bank changed everything. I had planned it, carefully coordinating with Eleanor to ensure she would be present as a witness. But even I wasn't prepared for how convincingly I would portray confusion when faced with the young teller's routine questions about my withdrawal. I need to take out some money for groceries. I told the teller a pleasant young woman named Sarah, who had helped me countless times over the past decade. "Of course, Mrs. Harper. How much would you like to withdraw?" I stared at her blankly, letting genuine confusion cloud my expression. How much do groceries cost? I can't remember what I usually spend." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Well, that depends on what you're buying. Would $100 be sufficient?" $100. I repeated my voice, rising, with what appeared to be distress. "That seems like so much money. Robert always handled these things. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Eleanor, who had been standing behind me, in line as planned, stepped forward with perfect timing. "Dorothy, honey, are you all right? You seem confused." "I don't understand why everything is so complicated," I said, allowing my voice to tremble. "Why can't I just buy groceries like I used to?" Sarah, now clearly concerned, asked if I'd like to sit down in the customer service area. As Eleanor guided me to a chair, she quietly suggested that perhaps I should call one of my children for assistance. The performance was working better than I'd hoped. Michael arrived at the bank within 20 minutes, his face a mask of barely controlled irritation. He spoke quietly with Sarah and the branch manager, asking questions about my account access and whether there were safeguards in place for customers showing signs of cognitive decline. "We should probably discuss having you added to Mom's accounts," I overheard him telling Eleanor. "Someone needs to be monitoring her financial decisions before she makes a serious mistake. Not before she gets confused or before she needs help, but before she makes a serious mistake." The distinction was telling and painful. That afternoon, Michael called a family meeting at my house. Jennifer arrived first, her BMW gleaming in my driveway like a statement of success. She strode into my living room wearing a tailored black suit and carrying a leather portfolio that suggested serious business. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened at the bank today." Jennifer began without preamble, settling onto my sofa as if she were conducting a client consultation in her design office. This kind of confusion about routine financial matters is concerning. When Kevin arrived, still in his teaching clothes and carrying a grocery bag filled with ingredients for dinner, the contrast in their approaches was immediately apparent. While Michael and Jennifer positioned themselves like attorneys preparing for depositions, Kevin sat on the floor next to my chair and asked if I wanted him to make tea. "I think we should consider having Mom evaluated by a specialist," Michael said, consulting notes he'd written on his phone. "If she's developing dementia, we need to know sooner rather than later, so we can make appropriate plans." "Plans for what?" Kevin asked, his voice sharper than I'd heard it since he was a teenager. "Legal planning," Jennifer interjected. "Power of attorney, healthcare directives, financial management. If Mom's condition deteriorates, someone needs to be prepared to step in." I watched this conversation unfold, as if I were observing strangers debate the fate of someone I'd never met. My two eldest children were discussing my future with clinical detachment, while my youngest looked increasingly upset by their business-like approach to what they saw as my decline. "Maybe we should slow down," Kevin suggested. "Mom had one confusing moment at the bank. That doesn't necessarily mean she needs to surrender control of her entire life." "Kevin, you're being naive," Michael said, with the condescending tone he'd perfected in law school. "Early intervention is crucial in these situations. The longer we wait, the more complicated everything becomes." As they debated my cognitive fitness and future care needs, I realized that this test had revealed more than I'd bargained for. Michael and Jennifer weren't just indifferent to my emotional well-being. They were actively eager to assume control of my life and resources. Kevin, meanwhile, was fighting to preserve my autonomy, even as he believed I was losing my mental faculties. But then something unexpected happened. Harold Brennan knocked on my front door. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Harold said when Kevin answered the door. But I noticed all the cars in the driveway and wondered if Dorothy might need anything. Jennifer looked annoyed by the interruption, but I found myself genuinely touched by Harold's concern. Here was a man who owed me nothing, who had barely known me beyond casual, neighborly exchanges, showing more consideration for my well-being than my own eldest children. Actually, Harold continued addressing me directly. "I've been meaning to ask if you'd like to join me for the senior coffee hour at the community center on Thursday mornings. My late wife used to enjoy it, and I thought you might find it pleasant. Low-key socializing, nothing too demanding." Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances that clearly communicated their irritation with this interruption to their planning session. But Kevin smiled for the first time that afternoon. "That sounds like a great idea, Mr. Brennan. Mom loves meeting new people." After Harold left, the family meeting resumed, but the dynamic had shifted. Kevin had become more protective, while Michael and Jennifer seemed more determined to establish their authority over my situation. "I think one of us should move in with Mom temporarily," Jennifer announced, "just until we have a better sense of how rapidly her condition might progress." "I'll do it," Kevin said immediately. "Actually, I was thinking it should be someone with more flexibility in their schedule," Michael countered. "Someone who can handle the legal and financial aspects of this situation as they arise." They were talking about me as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away from them. I realized that my test had succeeded beyond my worst expectations. I now knew exactly who my children were and what they valued. But I also understood that the situation had progressed beyond a simple experiment. Real decisions with lasting consequences were being made based on my deception. That night, after my children had left with plans to reconvene later in the week, I sat alone in my kitchen and finally acknowledged the full scope of what I had set in motion. There was no simple way to end this test without revealing the depth of my deception and potentially destroying my relationship with the one child who had proven himself worthy of my trust. I was trapped by my own elaborate lie, and tomorrow would bring new complications I wasn't prepared to handle. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning when I discovered that Michael had scheduled an appointment with a neurologist without consulting me. Eleanor called at 7:30, her voice tight with concern. "Dorothy, Michael called me last night. He said he's arranged for Dr. Patterson at Swedish Medical to evaluate you on Thursday. He wanted to know if I could drive you to the appointment, since he doesn't trust you behind the wheel anymore." I set down my coffee mug with trembling hands. The deception had spiraled completely beyond my control. In 3 days, I would be sitting across from a medical professional, pretending to have symptoms I didn't possess, potentially receiving a diagnosis that could follow me for the rest of my life. "Eleanor, I can't do this anymore," I whispered into the phone. "This has gone too far. I have to tell them the truth." "But what about the test? Don't you want to see it through?" "The test is over. Michael and Jennifer have shown me exactly who they are. And Kevin," my voice broke, "Kevin is going to hate me when he finds out what I've done. He's been researching support groups, Dorothy. He's been planning his entire life around taking care of me, and I've been lying to him every single day." That afternoon, I drove to Kevin's apartment near the University of Washington campus. His building was an old brick structure filled with graduate students and young professionals, the kind of place where idealism still felt possible and the future seemed manageable. I found him in his small living room, grading papers at a card table that served as his desk, classical music playing softly from a radio that had probably been old when I was his age. "Mom." Kevin jumped up immediately, concern flooding his face. Is everything okay? You never come here unannounced. I looked around his modest apartment, noting the framed photographs of our family, scattered on bookshelves, the Afghan I'd knitted for his college graduation, draped over his second-hand sofa, the careful way he'd arranged his limited space to accommodate both function and beauty. This was a young man who valued relationships over possessions, experiences over acquisitions. Kevin, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. I began settling onto his sofa and patting the cushion beside me. What I'm about to say is going to upset you, and you have every right to be angry with me. His face went pale. Mom, you're scaring me. Is it about the dementia? Is it progressing faster than we thought? There is no dementia, I said quietly. I've been pretending. For almost a month now, I've been acting confused and forgetful to test how you and your siblings would react if I really was developing cognitive problems. Kevin stared at me in complete silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like heartbreak. You've been lying to me, he said. Finally, his voice so soft, I could barely hear it. All those times, I've been researching treatments and support groups. All those nights, I've been lying awake, worrying about losing you, the same way we lost Dad. And you've been lying to me. Kevin, no. He stood up abruptly, running both hands through his hair. You let me believe you were sick. You watched me rearrange my entire life around taking care of you. And it was all an act. I had prepared for anger. I had prepared for hurt feelings and difficult conversations. But I hadn't prepared for the look of complete betrayal in my youngest son's eyes, the way he stepped back from me, as if I were a stranger who had wandered into his apartment uninvited. Why would you do this? He asked, his voice breaking. What kind of person pretends to be losing their mind just to manipulate their children? I needed to know who would actually be there for me if I really was in trouble, I said, knowing how inadequate the explanation sounded. After watching how Michael and Jennifer behaved during your father's illness, I needed to know if any of my children actually loved me for myself, rather than what I could do for them. So, you decided to torture the one person who was already proving it to you every single day. Kevin's anger was building, now his voice rising. Mom, I've been calling you constantly, visiting every week, researching treatment options, planning my future around your needs. What more proof did you need? He was right, of course. Kevin had already demonstrated his loyalty and love through his consistent presence and genuine concern. The test had been unnecessary for him, cruel even. I had subjected my most devoted child to weeks of unnecessary pain and anxiety, simply because I couldn't trust what was already evident. I made a terrible mistake, I admitted. I was so hurt by Michael and Jennifer's behavior during your father's illness that I let my anger and suspicion poison my judgment. You didn't deserve this, Kevin. You've been nothing but loving and supportive, and I repaid that by lying to you every single day. Kevin sat down heavily in his desk chair, his head in his hands. When he looked up at me again, his eyes were red-rimmed. Do Michael and Jennifer know the truth? Not yet, but I have to tell them. Michael has scheduled me for a neurological evaluation on Thursday. This charade has to end before it goes any further. A neurological evaluation. Kevin's voice was incredulous. Mom, do you understand what you've set in motion? Do you realize that Michael has probably already started legal proceedings to establish guardianship? That Jennifer has been making lists of your assets? I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean, legal proceedings? I mean that while you've been playing games, your other two children have been treating your supposed condition as an opportunity to take control of your life and finances. Michael called me yesterday to discuss the practical realities of Mom's situation. He wanted to know if I thought you were still competent to live alone. The room seemed to spin around me. I had created a scenario where my children were making real legal and medical decisions based on fraudulent information. The experiment had become something far more serious than I'd ever intended. Kevin, I have to fix this. I have to tell them the truth and deal with the consequences. He looked at me for a long time before responding. Yes, you do. But Mom, I don't know if I can forgive you for this. You broke something between us that I'm not sure can be repaired. As I drove home through the Seattle drizzle, Kevin's words echoed in my mind. I had won my test by proving that one of my children truly loved me. But in the process, I had lost the very thing I'd been trying to protect. The cure had been worse than the disease. That evening, I called Eleanor and asked her to come over. When she arrived, I was sitting in Robert's study with a bottle of wine and a box of tissues, both half empty. I've destroyed everything, I told her. The test worked too well. Now I know exactly who my children are, but I've lost the one who actually matters. Eleanor sat down across from me, her face grave. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell Michael and Jennifer the truth tomorrow. I'm going to cancel that medical appointment. And then I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to earn Kevin's forgiveness. And if he can't forgive you, I looked around Robert's study at the books he'd collected over 40 years, the photographs of our family scattered across his desk, the reading chair where he'd spent countless evenings solving crossword puzzles and listening to jazz. All of it felt hollow, now meaningless without the people who had made this house a home. Then I'll have learned the most painful lesson of my life, I said. That love can't survive being tested, and trust can't survive being betrayed, even with the best of intentions. I called Michael and Jennifer early the next morning, asking them to meet me at the house at 2 o'clock for an important family discussion. I didn't mention Kevin, though I hoped he would choose to come when I called him separately. His response was curt and non-committal. If you have something to say to the family, then say it. But don't expect me to pretend everything is normal between us. Michael arrived first, carrying his leather briefcase and wearing the expression of a man prepared to handle unpleasant but necessary business. Jennifer followed minutes later, her designer heels clicking authoritatively across my hardwood floors. They had clearly coordinated their approach, settling onto my sofa with the synchronization of business partners. Kevin came last, choosing to stand near the fireplace rather than sit with his siblings. The physical distance spoke volumes about the emotional chasm my deception had created. Thank you all for coming. I began my hands, folded carefully in my lap to hide their trembling. I've asked you here because I need to tell you something that's going to change how you see me and probably change our relationships permanently. Michael leaned forward slightly, his lawyer instincts apparently detecting something significant in my tone. Mom, if this is about the medical evaluation tomorrow, we can discuss any concerns you might have. There won't be a medical evaluation, I said clearly, because there's nothing wrong with my memory or my cognitive function. For the past month, I've been pretending to have early-stage dementia to test how each of you would respond if I really was becoming vulnerable. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, cold anger. Jennifer's mouth fell open, then snapped shut as her business-trained mind quickly processed the implications. Kevin remained motionless by the fireplace, his face carefully neutral. "You've been lying to us." Jennifer's voice was sharp with outrage. "For a month, you've been acting confused and helpless, making us worry about your health and your future, and it was all an elaborate deception." "Yes," I said simply, "and I'm deeply sorry for the pain and confusion I've caused." Michael stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the garden Robert had loved. When he turned back to face me, his expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. "Do you have any idea what you've put us through? The time I've spent researching care facilities and legal options. The appointments I've rearranged to accommodate your supposed needs." "I understand that you're angry," I began. "Angry doesn't begin to cover it," Michael interrupted. "Mom, I've been treating you like an invalid for weeks. I've been making plans to manage your affairs, to protect you from financial predators, to ensure you had proper medical care. I've been trying to be a responsible son, and you've been playing games with our lives." Jennifer's reaction was more calculating. "What exactly were you testing for? What did you hope to accomplish with this charade?" I took a deep breath, knowing that my answer would likely end my relationships with 2 of my 3 children permanently. I wanted to see who would actually care for me out of love rather than obligation or opportunity. During your father's illness, I watched how each of you responded to his needs, and I was heartbroken by what I observed. I needed to know if that pattern would repeat if I became the vulnerable one. So this was about Dad's cancer treatment. Michael's voice was incredulous. "You've been punishing us for not grieving the way you thought we should." "Not punishing," I said. "Testing and learning." Kevin spoke for the first time since entering the house. "And what did you learn, Mom?" I met his eyes, seeing the hurt and disappointment that my honesty couldn't erase. I learned that Michael and Jennifer's first instincts were to control and manage rather than comfort and support. I learned that they see me as a responsibility to be handled rather than a person to be cherished. "That's not fair," Jennifer protested. "We were trying to be practical and helpful." "You were trying to be efficient," I corrected. "There's a difference. When you thought I was becoming confused, Michael's first concern was gaining access to my bank accounts. Jennifer's first suggestion was hiring professional help to manage my daily life. Neither of you asked how I was feeling or what I needed emotionally." "And Kevin?" Michael asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer would be unfavorable to him. "Kevin responded with love," I said quietly. "He called to check on me regularly, not to monitor my condition, but to maintain our connection. He brought me groceries and stayed to cook dinner. He researched support groups and treatment options. He treated me like his mother, who was facing a difficult challenge, not like a problem to be solved." The room fell silent again. I could see Michael and Jennifer processing this information, recognizing the accuracy of my observations, even as they resented having their motivations exposed and judged. "So what happens now?" Jennifer asked finally. "Do you expect us to pretend this didn't happen? Do you want us to audition for your approval all over again?" "I don't expect anything," I said honestly. "I know that my deception has damaged our relationships, possibly irreparably. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I'm not sure I deserve it. I'm asking for understanding." Michael moved toward the door, his briefcase in hand. "Mom, I don't know if I can have a relationship with someone who would manipulate me this way. You may have thought you were conducting some kind of scientific experiment, but from my perspective, you were lying to your children and exploiting our concern for your well-being." He paused at the threshold, not looking back. "When Dad was sick, I was trying to balance his care with my job and my family responsibilities. I did the best I could with the resources and emotional bandwidth I had available. If that wasn't enough for you, then maybe we should both accept that we have different definitions of love and support. Jennifer followed him, stopping briefly beside my chair. I don't understand why you couldn't just have an honest conversation with us about your feelings instead of creating this elaborate test. But I suppose it doesn't matter now. After they left, Kevin and I sat in awkward silence. Harold Brennan was visible through the front window, raking leaves in his yard with methodical precision. Normal life continuing around us, while our family relationships crumbled. "Are you satisfied with the results of your experiment?" Kevin asked eventually. "No," I said truthfully. "I learned what I thought I wanted to know, but the cost was higher than I anticipated." Kevin nodded slowly. "Mom, I understand why you felt you needed to test Michael and Jennifer. Their behavior during Dad's illness was disappointing and hurtful. But testing me was unnecessary and cruel. I had already shown you who I was." "You're absolutely right," I acknowledged. "And I'm more sorry about that than I can adequately express." "I need time," Kevin said, standing to leave. "I don't know how long it will take me to trust you again, or if I even can. But I'm willing to try, eventually." After he left, I sat alone in the house that had once felt like the center of a large, loving family. The silence was different now, not peaceful, but empty. Eleanor arrived an hour later with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. She found me still sitting in the living room, staring at nothing. "How did it go?" she asked gently. "Exactly as badly as I expected," I replied. "Maybe worse." Over the next several months, I learned to live with the consequences of my choices. Michael and Jennifer maintained minimal contact, calling on holidays and my birthday, with stiff politeness, but no warmth. I had confirmed their worst suspicions about my manipulative nature, while simultaneously proving my worst suspicions about their priorities. Kevin gradually returned to my life, but our relationship was forever changed. The easy affection and trust we'd shared before my deception was replaced by something more careful, more considered. He still visited, still showed concern for my well-being, but there was a guardedness that hadn't existed before. 6 months later, I received an unexpected visitor. Harold Brennan knocked on my door on a Thursday afternoon, holding a plate of homemade cookies and wearing an expression of nervous determination. "Dorothy, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you doing all right? I know there was some family difficulty a while back, and I wanted you to know that if you need anything, companionship, help with errands, someone to talk to, I'm available." I invited him in for coffee, and as we sat in my kitchen talking about gardening and neighborhood news, I realized that sometimes the most genuine relationships develop with people who have no obligation to care about you. Harold's concern was freely given, unencumbered by complicated family history or expectations. "Harold, can I ask you something personal?" I said as he prepared to leave. "Why did you start paying attention to me after Robert died? We'd been neighbors for years, but we barely knew each other." He smiled, a little shyly. "My wife died 3 years ago, and during her final illness, I noticed how few people actually showed up to help. Family members who were too busy friends, who were uncomfortable with serious illness. It made me realize that we all need neighbors who choose to care, not because they have to, but because it's the right thing to do." Looking back now, I understand that my loyalty test revealed more about me than about my children. It showed that I was willing to deceive the people I loved most in order to confirm my own suspicions and justify my resentments. It proved that I valued being right more than being kind. But it also taught me that love comes in many forms, and that the relationships worth preserving are those built on honesty rather than performance. Kevin's gradual forgiveness has been a gift I'm still learning to deserve. Harold's friendship has shown me that it's never too late to form new connections based on mutual respect and genuine caring. My experiment in testing loyalty ultimately failed because real loyalty can't survive being tested. Trust, once broken by deliberate deception, can be rebuilt, but never fully restored. The scars remain, changing the shape and texture of relationships permanently. If I could go back and handle my grief and disappointment differently, I would choose honest conversation over elaborate deception. I would choose vulnerability over manipulation. But I can't change the past, only learn from it, and try to deserve the forgiveness I've been granted. Sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that cost us everything we thought we wanted to protect. And sometimes the greatest loyalty is shown not by those who pass our tests, but by those who stay with us even after we've failed theirs.